Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Rates and Lanes podcast. I am your host, Rico Muhammad, and as my good friend and co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow. We are pre-recording this episode. I am going to be taking a little bit of time off, and Chuck's going to get us some things checked out. So we're going to pre-recording this episode, and we thought that it would be a great opportunity for us to kind of circle back around and talk about. Well, one of the things that I wanted to definitely talk about was carriers approaching and getting their own customers. I think that the present market conditions present an opportunity unlike any other time before, where it may be a lot easier as a smaller carrier to go in and be able to secure you some customers to begin to fill out and build your dumbbell. Um, you know, define your service areas. So we're going to try to pick Chuck's brain from the, we're going to ask him to put on his carrier hat and switch out and put on his broker hat for a little while. And we're going to ask, I got a couple of questions that I want to throw at him. But this is going to be the subject of tonight's show. And if you have questions pertaining to this, if something that we gloss over or we miss or we don't go into as much detail as you would like to know about or hear about, by all means, drop us a comment and we'll try to circle back around and address it at a later episode. But with that being said, good evening, good. Well, since we're pre-recording, good morning, Chuck.
Good morning. Actually, it's afternoon where I am. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. A great topic. There's a lot of talk about it. You know, I've heard from some of my carrier friends down the States that have gotten. They're very worried that AGX went under down in Florida-based broker, and some of these people are owed money to by AGX. That's a concern, and they're thinking, well, maybe I can approach the customer. Maybe you can, depending on the size. And I had a conversation. This is a very timely discussion because last evening I have another friend of mine, Ron, who owned a very large trucking company. Well, I think it was large. He had 400 trucks, which I think is pretty damn big, that he sold out about 27 years ago or so. And he's very up on the industry. And we happened to be talking about it last night, about getting direct customers. And he said, the only way, there's a couple ways to do it. He said, first of all, and here's a guy with, even more carrier experience than me, because I think he started in 66. At like 16 years old, he bought a truck. Interesting guy, and I'm trying to get him on the show. But anyways, he said, the most important thing is you've got to specialize in something. Which I've said before, but he has an expression: niches make riches, and it's so true. I think it's going to be easier to get direct customers if you have something other than a dry van. But that's not saying you can't get direct customers with a dry van. In fairness, you can, but you've got to be able to offer them something they need, and it's got to be the right size customer, which you and I think maybe have spoken to about before. So don't bother with the great big Procter and Gamble's and the Nestle's, but the smaller ones.
So, Chuck, right now we are experiencing a kind of a new. I'm not going to say new, but the phenomenon that is kept going on right now is that we are experiencing the market has definitely tightened, especially when it comes to the spot market. So you have shippers and brokers are kind of scrambling to try to find trucks to run these lanes. Your tender rejection rates are at I think it's a multi-year high presently. So that's why the time is ripe for carriers to begin to maybe trying to carve out an opportunity to begin to approach shippers on a more direct basis. So just can you kind of speak to what does that mean? You hear people talk about, actually, can you break it down maybe into a more layman's term? You hear people talk all the time sometimes about the tender rejection rates and stuff like that. What does that mean? What does that kind of, what does that mean for people, small carriers and the such?
Okay, well, a tender rejection, that means, so a lot of these large companies like your Nestle's and all these, I'm just using them because they're a large shipper. They've signed up with a broker a C.H. Robinson, a Trafix, or whoever, FedEx, and on contracted lanes. And then you have the large contracted companies, even some of the smaller ones that are refusing to honor those tenders to those brokers. So in a lot of those cases, depending on the contract, a lot of them are written so that even if you have a contract to haul for, I'm going to put a number in my head of $2.50 going from point A to point B, and that's the broker with the customer. And all of a sudden, the carriers want $2.60. Those carriers are saying, no, I'm not going to haul that at $2.20. So that's the rejection. They're saying, no, I will not take that load, Mr. Broker. I refuse to, because it's not enough money for this market. Find somebody else. Where the way the market was a month ago or 6 weeks ago, no matter what you threw out there, was like feeding hungry fish. We're back to we're getting back to where we should be. Now, we don't know whether this is just weather related. Now, we know we've had a lot of exits from the industry. But we don't know whether this whole increase in tender rejections is just because there's been so much going on with weather in both our countries, but especially your country.
Yeah, we just experienced probably the biggest winter storm we've had down this way in probably last 10 years, I think.
Yeah,
especially for the Southeast and everything. So when you have this environment where you got carriers rejecting tenders and things of that nature, and so now they have been accustomed, say shippers have been accustomed to moving freight at a certain amount, but now they're getting pushback. What kind of opportunity would that present for? What challenges and what opportunities does that present for a small carrier?
Okay, first of all, with the big companies, your big Fortune 500s that are shipping massive loads, there's not much of a direct opportunity there whatsoever. However, the big opportunity and the challenge at the same time is to approach your small shippers, okay, your specialized shippers. And okay, let's talk about specialized. Maybe it's a company that is a metal fabricator that makes specialty products that are one of a kind. Could be robotics. It could be for the aircraft industry. All sorts of different. They could service even the automotive industry, but at a high level, so that they, it may take them 3 years from start to finish to build a piece of equipment. From the time they get the order until they deliver it, and those companies are looking quite often, especially the smaller ones. They're looking for people that can get their product to market. So if you have the appropriate equipment, and I'm just going to say, let's say a double drop deck, or perhaps a drop deck that's got a curtain sider on it, they're looking for you. They want to deal with you. Now, they may not have 50 loads a month, but they may have 6 loads a month, and you become their go-to guy. That's the big thing, is to find these smaller people, because they'll pay good money. And they would rather, those specialty companies would love to have a guy like Rico. Oh my gosh, Rico, you hear these people talk when you meet them, and they talk about their trucker. He's part of the team when they have these people that are in-house, they're specialty guys. And they'd rather deal with a man or a person with 1 truck or 2 trucks than they would somebody with 100 trucks or a broker.
So I guess my follow-up question along those lines as well, Chuck, we talked about how they'll pay really, really well. Pay terms, is that something that can be negotiated to where, I know that most times when you're dealing with a broker, you're normally looking at least 30 days to getting paid. When you got a direct shipper, what is a good rule of thumb or a good goal to shoot for as far as pay terms?
Really, when you're making that sales call, and you got to feel the shipper out, the best you're probably going to do in most cases, the very best, is 14 days. Okay, 30 is standard. what you can do is offer what we call a trade discount. So by the time you finish fooling with a factoring company and you really get into what you're getting, you're quite often you're 5% off that invoice. Quite often, you don't think, but there's extra charges. They only they advance you 75 or 90%. You have to sign a contract, all this stuff. If you have a direct shipper and you're going to haul a load, especially if it's a good paying load and it's paying you $4 a mile, and you can say, listen, I'll give you 4% off, or maybe even 5% if you have to, because it's a direct shipper. You're not paying for a factor, you're not paying for a dispatch service, any of those other stupid charges that people have to pay.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you're getting the money in your hand. You give them a discount, and usually you can get paid fairly quickly. And I would say 7 days, because it takes these larger companies 7 days in order to process a payment. Even these smaller large companies, you're not going to walk in there and just get a check.
Now let's get into a little bit more of the meat of the matter when it comes to negotiating. There are all different types of things that are on the table when it comes to negotiating. Price is, of course, one thing, but then you also have free time detention rates, layover rates, things of that nature. What would you advise? How would you advise smaller carriers when they're approaching these shippers? How should those things kind of come into their conversation when it comes to negotiating rates?
Okay, first thing, before we start, I just want to say one thing. Before you attempt to go into a customer, know how to do it. There is as great a skill to selling as there is to driving a truck. And every one of our listeners out there, I would say 99% of them have the available time while they're driving their truck to take audio courses in sales. Start taking some courses. Get educated so you don't walk in there and act like an idiot. And I'm sorry to put it that way, but I've heard that so many times. Somebody's got the best of intentions, but they haven't been trained. And salespeople are born, great salespeople are born, but anyone can learn how to sell. It's the experience. Either you're born with it or you do it a lot, okay? You really, really push a lot, and you find out, how to sell, and then you go in. You do want to have some area of expertise on that first call, especially. You're going to be scared, okay?
Right.
Be more scared making that first sales call than you probably were the first time you ever drove a truck by yourself.
It can definitely be a little intimidating, but as the old saying goes, practice makes perfect.
Exactly. And if you do enough of it, if you read about any of these athletes, how many times they practice throwing hoops in an empty basketball court, it's just amazing. But that's exactly, repetition is the mother of perfection. And ladies and gentlemen, you have all day in that truck to practice your sales pitch, and you could tape it.
So once we get past that portion of it, though, I'm just curious as to how should you involve, weave that into the conversation when it comes to negotiating. Once you get past the portion of getting in there, now you're talking shop with a potential shipper. How much of that, how much flexibility or give should you be willing to have when it comes to pricing on all those different aspects? Should you be trying to make sure that you're hitting home runs on all of them, or do you have to make sure that you're being a little bit flexible on some of those issues?
Great question. Okay. First of all, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Ask questions and listen. Okay. That's the 2 things. Ask questions. Ask a better question. Find out what the heck you're hauling. Find out what it's worth. Find out the types of places they receive. You can't start to give a price. That's part of the problem with our whole industry. People are going in blind, Rico, and they go and they sell something. I realize trucks are a commodity, but sometimes they're not. We're not talking about rolls of tissue paper. We're talking about it. Do you need to make an appointment that takes 3 days once you have the bill of lading until you can get offloaded and you have a specialty piece of equipment and you're sitting there for 3 days waiting to get unloaded? So ask questions. You should have a list of everything that pertains to the type of equipment you're offering. And so you know exactly. Ask questions. Where am I delivering? What am I doing? Write it down. If the person is totally price focused, nothing else but price, and you walk into a place and the guy goes, "Okay, don't waste my time. How much is your rate from Atlanta to Chicago? I got 2 minutes."
That's probably not the shifter you want to.
No, don't waste your time, because what will happen is you're going to bust your back for that guy or that girl.
Somebody just undercut you.
The second another person walks in 5 cents a mile cheaper, you're gone. I don't care how many snowstorms you ran into, they'll never remember it. So you got to ask a question. I'm a big believer, find out where their pain points are. Okay, that's the big thing. You do need to know all those other things, the value, what you're hauling, how long it takes to load, how long it takes to unload. If it's a specialized shipper and they've got a specialized stainless steel product, they may never ship to the same 2 places twice. But you got to find out where you're going. The question, are you going to military bases and places like that? If you are, may not be the place for you, because I just read something. If non-American citizens and felons are not allowed in military bases to deliver. Well, you know what? You may have done something stupid when you're 18 years old and gotten into trouble. And that may prevent you from taking that customer. And don't be one of those guys that shows up at a military base with a $3 million piece of equipment and they won't let you in.
Right.
That's not good. The optics are real bad. So do your homework.
So let me ask you this question. Say you go into, you have in your mind, you sat down and you've kind of done some numbers and everything, and you kind of got it in your mind where you want to. Someone that's just starting out, they know where they want to serve. They know their service areas. They know where they're based out of, and they know where they want to go to.
Exactly.
But say, for instance, if you walk into a customer in your area where you're based out of, but they have a specific need that could fit for you, but it doesn't fit into what your initial thought was. Where do you think that, how should someone handle that situation? Should they allow, if they're going in fresh and they don't really have anything going on, should they be flexible and adjusting what their service area is to accommodate this new potential customer, or how would you approach that?
That is an incredible question. I give you a 10 on that one, buddy. So I've had this happen. Best way to handle it so you don't get into trouble, because truckers are famous for trying to solve problems by creating new ones. It's in our DNA. And the best way to handle that is, okay, you have freight going up into Seattle, Washington from Atlanta. Interesting. You've got a load every 3 weeks. Okay, let me see what I can do. I think I can help you on this. Do you mind if I don't give you an answer right this second? Because I got to see how this will work. But I think we can do something. So you leave them on a positive note. I think we can do something. Rather than if it's a flat out no, and maybe this person's asking you for something impossible, then you just be honest. Say, you know what? I don't want to waste your time. I have a refrigerated trailer. I'm not interested in doing open deck. No, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think we can do business.
Right. But if there's an opportunity there that might not necessarily fit into what you initially thought, but it could be a potential for you to pivot.
100%. And then you have to go home and you have to start doing your homework. So I'm going to just use that as an example. You walked into a place in Atlanta and they said, Rico, I'm sorry, we don't do any Florida. We don't do any North Carolina. Everything we do it's all for the West Coast shipyards, all the way from Seattle down to California. That's where we ship to, and that's the only place we ship to. Then you'd say, okay, let me see what I can do. And you would go back and you would make some contacts, people you know, brokers, unless you know. Unless you know of a shipper in that area, maybe you do know of somebody. Maybe your cousin's your cousin that lives in South Carolina married a girl whose father is from there, who's a big business guy, and you could call him and say, "Do you know anybody who ships back to Atlanta or something?" I don't know if you're like me, but if I go into a grocery store, still it's a bad habit. I will look at a can of peas to see where they come from. And a habit, I'm all so, and I think a lot of people in the trucking industry do that. So you just have some familiarity. You know that there's certain types of canned seafood maybe come from Seattle, Washington, that you could put in your wagon.
Right.
Otherwise, you are at the mercy of load brokers, but you can solve that. Deal with some real good ones that have several offices, and there are several. Okay, and get set up with them. Call their Seattle office, especially if you are already set up with, let's say, in your case, C.H. Robinson, Atlanta. I'm just going to use them for example because they're so large. If you get the phone number to contact in at their Seattle office and say, and introduce yourself, say, listen, I do a lot of work with Atlanta. Greg told me to call you. Do you think you could help me if I ran out there? Do you have anything coming back towards Atlanta or South Carolina or Florida? Who knows? If you don't ask, you don't get. And you may say, geez, you know what? It's funny. We have a shipment every week.
So for a smaller carrier, what would you recommend their average line haul be? How far out would you recommend for a small company, 2 or 3 trucks at the most? How far out should they be going? Because we talk all the time about, small guys can't be all things to all people.
Can't.
So how big of a diameter would you say they should be maybe throwing the net out?
Keep it short, just like me. The shorter you go, the more money you make per mile. For some reason, I could never figure this out in 50 odd years. As you increase your distance, quite often, your rate starts diminishing. Okay.
Right.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I have some real bad news for all of you. Your trucks are stupid. They don't know where they're going. Okay. They will drink the same amount of fuel, no matter if you're going to
or more.
Exactly.
Depending on the terrain.
Those mountains are 44,000. And you know what? Those things start sucking fuel. It doesn't, any diesel engine will suck more fuel when it sees a hill. It just does. It's just the way it is. Even my little, even one of my little SUVs got much better. I put weight on it coming back from Louisville. I picked up some of the Spindrift soda water that I drink all the time. And I picked some up in Louisville, and I actually got much better fuel mileage. And then when I took that put the same amount coming back from Pennsylvania, my fuel mileage was horrible. So it just shows you these trucks do not like hills. So just keep that in mind if you're quoting going into an area that's really hilly. Some of the stuff in North Carolina, for example, and Tennessee, even West Virginia, there's some good pulls in there.
Right. Okay. So,
and also the other thing, Rico, I just want to add, you also have to take into consideration tolls. There may be some great opportunities for some of our listeners going into some of those godforsaken areas like New York and New Jersey. We have a listener that I know does very well, and that's where she runs. Predominantly from Virginia going into New York, multi-drops, and she's never felt any drop of business throughout this entire period of time because she does the stuff nobody wants
to do.
You got it. And she's making money. So, it says a lot.
Absolutely. Well, Chuck, I'm looking at the time. We're coming up really close on it. I don't want to get too far off. But I think that this is a good series that we probably need to kind of explore a little bit more and go a little bit more in depth to. I definitely have a ton more of more follow-up questions, but I think that we kind of gave at least a good primer for people to begin to kind of maybe start thinking about, and different things that they need to maybe start to map out to begin to maybe begin the prospecting process. And I think, and maybe we can go into that portion a little bit more as well, as far as prospecting potential shippers.
Two things for prospecting real quickly. Best places to look. Number one, everybody on this show drives around industrial areas. Take a look for smaller buildings that have some loading docks, or if you're an open deck carrier, you don't need a loading dock, but big garage door. You can tell by how big a company is usually. That's number one. You can get some information from ChatGPT. You can also, and this is I'll tell you a little trade secret that I found. Go to some local trade shows. Doesn't matter what it is, but especially if it's pertaining to your industry. For example, for you, because you're a reefer hauler, if I was trying to increase my business with food, I would go to perhaps a specialty food show that was located somewhere in Atlanta or somewhere in North Carolina or Florida, those places where you run. And I would get in, and you got to be very careful in these shows as they've really clamped down. You're not supposed to solicit. So we'll leave that for another show, and we're going to talk about how to work a trade show because there's gold in them.
That ought to be. I'm looking forward to that already, just thinking about it.
That's a great way to build a business.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, we're trying to give a little bit more of a bite-sized episode shows here lately, instead of doing more longer term content. We're trying to do a little bit more bite-sized, and hopefully, you guys have found these smaller episodes a little bit more helpful. You got a little bit more time to digest them instead of the longer forms, and we got some guests that we're going to save for some longer term content as well. But we kind of trying to switch up the content a little bit and try to make it a little bit more short form for you guys to be able to digest it easier. And so with that being said, we want to thank you guys for taking the time out to hang out with us. We are always grateful for you doing so. And if you guys would do us a huge favor, make sure that you please like, share, and subscribe to the show. It doesn't cost you a dime, but it helps us out tremendously, gets us out to a broader algorithm to get the show out to more people. And with that being said, we want you guys to continue to be safe out there, stay healthy, stay profitable, keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise. God bless you and good night.
Catch on the flip.